Hi everyone, it's me, Rachel. I wanted to just do a little video. I've really been kind of on the fence about doing a video because it's just been so difficult. I know that a lot of people deal with trauma in different ways, with public trauma and personal trauma. And for some people, it's paralyzing and you just don't want to do anything. You don't even want to get out of bed. For other people, it's motivating and it's inspiring toward action. For others, it kind of gets them riled up into like debate mode. And so, just like there are different styles of dealing with these recent events. And I just wanted to encourage you to give each other grace, give each other space, and kind of the latitude to process and respond to not only the death of George Floyd, of course, as well as the current coronavirus pandemic crisscrossing with that situation, but also the ongoing systemic racism, the institutionalized racism, the things that we have been marching for, fighting for so many years, and that generations before us have marched and fought for, and that are still ongoing problems. And that frustration, I think, kind of affects people in different ways. Some people repress it, some people express it, and that repression or expression just looks different depending on the person's style and depending on how they are processing that as far as their like moral imperative of what they should be doing to stand up for their values in the situation. So I was talking with a dear friend of mine, Clyde Ramalaine, in South Africa. We keep in touch through WhatsApp, which those of you who have international relationships, that is a great tool. I keep in touch with my son Isaiah in the UK, also on WhatsApp. So Clyde and I were talking, and out of a conversation that we had, in part, this kind of birthed a sermon that he gave today. And this is, of course, May 31st, 2020. And he is giving this sermon in South Africa, but it's really about America, and it's really about the state of affairs here today. And I think that his sermon just really resonates in a way that many other statements recently that I've seen anyway, on the media and so on, just really don't have that same resonance. So I wanted to share his sermon. He's given me permission to share it. And the title of it is, I Can't Breathe in This Place. And again, his name is Bishop Clyde Ramalaine. And I spent 17 days with Clyde and his wife Lynn and their 3 sons in South Africa. We spoke at University of Johannesburg. We spoke in Cape Town. I was there for the Quest for a Non-Racial South African Society dialogue, the kind of kickoff for that. And the idea was, of course, to counter or to kind of stand up to and work to overcome the very racialized society that has become institutionalized out of apartheid. So even though apartheid is technically over, just like slavery is over in America, there still is ongoing discrimination, prejudice, injustice, inequity, lack of inclusion, lack of opportunity in South Africa for groups there. It's not equal. So in the same way in the U.S., there's still that inequity, that discrimination, the prejudice, the lack of access, the lack of equal opportunity for business advancement, for pay, for equal work, for equal promotion, for equal land ownership, for so many things in education, in healthcare, in economic development and security, in political representation. in so many aspects of life. There's still this sense of a push and a struggle toward that future goal. So there's an awareness in this moment in America that we have not reached the goal. We are not living in a post-racial society. We have not dealt with the race worldview and the racism that has been birthed from that worldview sufficiently. We have not, dealt with it in terms of holding it accountable to where we can have solutions, to where we can heal as a country. So we are at this moment in crisis in the United States of America, and Clyde is a freedom fighter from the 80s. He was fighting for freedom in South Africa, marching in the streets during his last year of high school and risking arrest. And that was during, of course, the Mandela era. And thankfully, the apartheid regime was toppled and there was victory in that. But once again, it wasn't enough. Like the push still hasn't reached the ultimate goal of equity, inclusion, justice. So that struggle continues in South Africa. A parallel struggle, of course, has always continued in the United States of America. And in many ways, the South African apartheid system was modeled after the U.S. Jim Crow system. In some ways, the freedom fighters' processes and methods were modeled after the Black Power and Civil Rights Movement process and methods. And so there has been some cross-pollination between the two countries, and there's this understanding of that struggle being a like a sister struggle, like it's an analogous struggle. So the threat to justice, the lack of equity, the ongoing brutality and injustices that citizens are facing in both countries are still and cause for concern. So I want to share with you Clyde's speech. I don't want to talk too much more about this from my voice, just to say that, once again, give people the grace to do what they need to do right now. Try to reserve judgment instead of pointing the finger and saying, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. What are you doing? What can you do? Because we all can do what we're good at. If you bake, then bake and deliver those baked goods to somebody who needs a little spiritual uplift or a sweet treat to get them through that day or whatever. If you write, then write to legislators, to district attorneys, to state and federal officials. If you organize, organize for the marches, for the protests, for voting rights, for so many different things. Like there's literally something that everybody can do. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, I don't know what to do. What can I do to help? And I think that sometimes I feel like saying I don't know you well enough to know what you can do to help, because what do? Do what you do. Do what you are good at doing. Obviously, sharing posts and raising awareness, goes, so far, and that's important to not be silent. For the last couple of weeks, my verified Twitter account has been inaccessible to me. So probably on Twitter looks like I'm silent, but I just cannot even log in. And I've been super frustrated with Twitter. Like I've sent them so many reports and requests and they just are not responding. But for those of you who have your social media accounts, I still am active on my verified Instagram and then on my personal Facebook, because my verified Facebook also got compromised. So I don't have access to that. But those of you who have your platforms and you have your friend groups and your family groups, talk to people, build those bridges, share things that are encouraging and uplifting and inspiring, not only toward this moment of protest, but also beyond it toward affecting real change. So start thinking about what you can do on the ground. Are you going to join a citizen review board? Are you going to, for police accountability? Are you going to volunteer for a nonprofit that is intervening in juvenile justice reform? Are you going to become a member of the NAACP? I mean, what are you going to do? And then think through, like, what is that actually going to accomplish? Because I think that with each thing, some things are very easy to do. It's easy to pay a $35 membership fee and not go to meetings and not do anything with that, but it makes you feel better. So really you're doing that to more appease your guilt. That's what you're getting out of it. Like, you feel like you did something, but you want to also hold yourself accountable. Like, what did I actually do? Just no judgment on becoming a member of an organization, because that's important, but just think through, like, how far am I willing to go? How far does your compassion reach? Does it reach far enough for you to sacrifice something, to share resources with another family, to send gifts, to help with transportation, maybe help bringing water to people who are on the streets, maybe helping a business rebuild from this situation, whatever it is, whatever you feel compelled to do, I feel like is the right thing for you to do. So just like, I don't feel like anybody should like be telling me what to do in this moment. As a mother of 3 Black sons, and as someone who's fought for civil rights for decades, I also feel like even if you've never been involved before, I can't tell you what to do either, because I don't know you well enough to know what you're good at, what inspires you, and what will motivate you ongoing beyond a moment to actually become part of real change, part of a society that is equitable, accepting, and inclusive for everyone. And so, with regards to human rights, the right to life, the right to clean food and water, the right to all the civil rights as well. But before even having like voting rights or education rights, there has to be an equal right to life, the ability to stay alive on the planet, because life really comes before all other human rights. And so I think that's also what really reaches a fulcrum point and a fever pitch in this moment, is that it's about loss of life, and that's final, and that can't be, there's no justice that can be really served for that fully, because that life cannot be brought back. So I think that in this moment, once again, I just want to encourage you to do what you want to do, what you feel compelled to do. It may not be perfect. It may be messy. You may, make some mistakes, but do something. Don't just sit. If it means you want to educate yourself, start reading books. Start reading history. Start taking a course. Whatever it is that you feel like you can do to raise your own level of awareness, increase your level of connection, participation in your local community, your state, group, your region, or national, or even international. So Clyde, he preaches, and so this is what he does. He writes and he preaches, and so he's put out this piece today, and I wanted to share it with my fellow citizens in America and anybody else who watches my YouTube channel, honestly, because there are people all over the world who do tune in from time to time. So thank you for being here. And once again, this is a state of emergency for any mother or parent, for that matter, of a Black son in America. It is a state of emergency for Black men, for Black boys. It is a state of emergency for anyone who cares about or loves those men and boys and babies and everyone who's coming forward in the future. It is also for the daughters and sisters and mothers and women, because this touches on Breonna Taylor's recent March killing as well, being shot by police in her own bed at home. So there's just so much at stake right now, and I just want to once again share this sermon with you. I don't go to church anymore. Church is kind of a little bit of a trauma trigger for me, and I know that is the case with some people. It's not the case with everyone, but I also do respect the tradition of preaching in a similar way that I respect academic lectures, because I think that the sources and the information, even though they differ, still can come to a place of connection with real lived experience. And I think that that's what we need right now. So I'm going to share this message from Clyde Ramalaine called "I Can't Breathe in This Place." And I'll also give a few little comments at the end. I'm not going to give, by the way, any video. It was just an audio file that was shared with me. I think that we have all seen enough graphic, traumatizing visual information in the last week. And so it'll just be a black screen. I'm going to share a picture of me with Clyde and his wife briefly for part of it, but then it'll just go to the black screen for most of his sermon, so you can really just focus on the words and listen.
Good morning, brothers and sisters, on this last day in the month of May, as we are still confronted with the reality of COVID, the novel virus COVID-19. On Monday, a day of celebrations in the life of Americans, public holiday, namely Memorial Day. Memorial Day turned out in Minneapolis to mean something else for what is considered to be the world's leading nation. We heard the last words of a man, a black man, a grown man, summarized in eternity of, "Please, I can't breathe. I can't breathe." We heard the lament of a man crying for his mother as 4 white officers pinned him to the ground, one having his knee on the neck of the late George Floyd. It is believed that, according to reports, that he had him in that position for the duration of almost 9 minutes, of which the latter 2.5 minutes. Already by that time, Mr. Floyd was no longer alive, or he was no longer with it in that regard. The scenes unfolding from there depicts the pictures that shows how far America and perhaps the world still has to go, despite the great claims of an emancipation of slavery, despite the awesome work of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, in the 20th century. In 2020, in the second decade of the 21st century, America is still struggling with the reality of racism, is still struggling with the supremacist notion of a white identity that rules and reigns and has found a nesting ground within the social, within the justice system, and more particularly so in regard to the police system of that nation. Time after time, we have witnessed many black kids, many young black men being targeted for arrest, being targeted to be shot at, being killed at the hands of the same white supremacist ideology that governs the police system. It can be no accident. It can be no accident that we have another George Floyd, no different to Philando Castile, no different to Rodney King, no different to a slew of other names that one could mention right up here. And so within this context, it begins to make sense to ask the question, why would Floyd say, I can't breathe? Why would Floyd say that? We on Saturday, we on Sunday now, and we know that this violence has erupted in at least 25 major cities in the U.S., and there seems to be no end to it. And let me make a footnote here as a form of introduction, and that amidst all of this, we hear the voices of those that plead for reason and plead for a historical reality of Martin Luther King, Selma March or Montgomery bus boycott situation, in which they're asking that the protesters and uphold the principle of the civil rights movements of passive resistance in this regard. In my particular view, I think that we must resist the temptation to romanticize Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in this particular epoch. Perhaps the better question that we should engage at this hour is, if Dr. Martin Luther King, certainly 50 years after Dr. Martin Luther King, America still finds itself within the same conundrum, the same challenge, even more brazen now, despite all the realities that, despite the fact that it had already a black president, the challenge then becomes, should we still contend that passive resistance, the philosophy that Dr. King adopted from the toolbox of Mahatma Gandhi? And let me make a point about Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi became known for passive resistance as a means of protest. And while this looks noble and while this appears to be the right thing to do, we must not forget that within our context in Africa, we know that Gandhi himself was a racist. We know that Mahatma Gandhi did not have a high opinion of the African people that dwelt on the African continent. And so we can argue to that extent to what was the reason behind Mahatma Gandhi's passive resistance. And so therefore, when King adopted passive resistance, and passive resistance became the signpost of what is considered to be the civil rights movement, we must not now in 2020 then be held hostage by many like Andy Young and others, people that we revere within that historical reality, to now, in a sense, almost play this down and to say, just calm down and protest beautifully. I was disturbed when I heard that Andy Young, the former ambassador and great leader and contemporary of Martin Luther King, in this particular season is asking for protesters to protest beautifully and then disperse. How beautiful can it be when the brutality of racism can be this ugly, to kill in stark view of a live recording, snuff the life out of a black man at the hand of a policeman? We've got to contend with these realities. When George Floyd was shouting, "Please, I can't breathe," he was speaking to the reality of America's problem, the problem that the black man can't breathe economically, the black man can't breathe educationally, the black man can't breathe in health and healthcare, the black man can't breathe in political representation, the black man can't breathe in criminal justice, the black man can't breathe in safety, public safety for that matter. When we talk of these matters, we are then reminded of the reality of a society that has been denied, a group of people that have been denied oxygen to live. Within that space, every attempt and every attack has been on their identity. Every time a mother has to give her son the talk, we know that suggests that the mother has to tell, the father has to tell, the grandparents has to tell the boy child, the black boy child, that he's got to be careful, he's got to pull up his pants, he mustn't wear a hoodie, he must be alert. That is the talk that has become now subculture of the American society. It's a talk that speaks to "I can breathe." And so when Floyd's demise summarizes for us today the challenge of America, it also summarizes the challenge of the black man across the entire scope of what is considered to be the globe. And I come this morning on this last day perturbed, perplexed in my soul and troubled within my inner man, that we do not read the signs of the times. And I was also tempted to adopt what is considered to be Martin Luther King's philosophy, which is really Gandhi's philosophy on passive resistance in the face of brutality. But I don't think so anymore. And I find out that I have a leg to stand on within the historical Jesus. It is then here that I would like to take my attention to the book of Mark, the book of John, chapter 2, and in particular from verse 13 through to verse 19 is what we will read. The heading says, Jesus cleanses the temple. But I would like to use today for my subject, Jesus saying, I can't breathe in this place. I want to talk about Jesus, the historical Jesus, saying, I can't breathe within this place called the temple. The text reads as follows. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the money changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. I'm going to read until the 16th verse. And then I also would like to read Mark's version. By the way, all four synoptic gospel writers have this portion of text to different degrees, of course, reflecting on a time in the life of Jesus when he cleansed the temple. In Mark's version of the cleansing of the temple, he notes in the 11th chapter, he notes in particular when he talks about the cleansing of the temple, these words, and that's the words I would like to go to this morning. He says, my Father's house shall be a house, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. And he's talking about the temple, saying the temple was never meant to discriminate in worship on the basis of race. The temple was never meant to discriminate on the basis of nationality, but the temple was meant for all nations. Now let's go back to John. John gives us more detail. This in the second chapter of John places Jesus en route to the Passover. He is coming into Jerusalem into the Passover. Now we know that John's gospel gives us at least 6 feasts that Jesus attended, approximately 4 of these feasts within the 3.5-year lifespan of ministry in that regard that Jesus had, were actually the Passover feast. And on one occasion of this, and by the way, there are some scholars that believe that Jesus did not just clean the temple once, but he cleansed the temple twice. I'm trying to make a point that Jesus himself once shouted out loud, I can't breathe in this place. And so now when you read Mark's gospel, Mark says that when upon Jesus arriving at the temple, upon him entering the temple, he was disturbed. How do we know that? He was disturbed because Mark says, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. He found that the state of the temple is overtaken by a commercialization, by the intention of profit, where people were fraudulently engaging and robbing others. He finds that the place of worship has become an unholy spot, and in holy anger he rises up, and the text says in the 15th verse, and when he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out. I want to stop there for a minute here because I'm told that Derek Chauvin, according to the prosecutor, he has been charged now with 3rd-degree murder, which speaks to the fact that the argument is made that there was no intent really. Well, we know what we saw, we know what we observed, we know what was live streamed, we know what was recorded, and if that is not intent, I don't know what would constitute intent for the claim of murder in that regard. However, Jesus, looking at the state of the church, or the temple for that matter, he then puts together, he then makes a whip. That tells me that the historical Jesus, my Savior and God, he had intent the moment he saw the upside nature of the temple, the moment he saw injustice in the temple, the moment he saw iniquity in the temple, it stirred him to a place where he took time to put together a whip. Now the whip were made according to researchers of rushes, and these rushes were strings or cords that were tied, that the animals were tied with as they were standing on standby to be auctioned off in that regard. Jesus then put together these rushes. He puts together these rushes and makes himself a whip. Now, I don't know about you, but I disagree. I looked at Ellicott's commentary. I looked at Barnes's commentary. I looked at Benson's commentary. And even I looked at Poole's commentary. And most of the instances here, I find that most of them say that the intention of Jesus was not to be violent. I beg to disagree. I beg to disagree with the great commentators. I disagree because I think there is a temptation for many of us to look at Jesus as a meek and mild person. It would not make sense for some people theologically, etymologically, to define Jesus as violent within the scope of being the Savior of the world. It would not make sense. It would not make sense to talk of Jesus within the frames of him becoming violent. But I would submit today to you that there was at least one time Jesus did become violent. There's a place you get to. There is a stage you reach when iniquity and injustice drives you to a place where you can resort to violence. That while the biblical text does not tell us or let us in on how many people got injured on that day, but I would like to submit that his whip that he put together whipped somebody with it. And somebody will say, but no, these were used just to herd out the cattle. Well, I think there were some money changers there. And I know there were some money changers there. I know he turned the tables upside down. If you tell me what upside downing of turntables mean, it means that somebody is in violent rage at the point in time. You mean to tell me, preacher, that there was a time in the life of Jesus, the historical Jesus, when he became violent? Yes, I submit he became violent. There was a time in the life of Jesus, as recorded by all synoptic gospel writers, that he himself put together, at least John records it, put together a whip and used a whip to cleanse the temple. I'm not sure what kind of damage was made to the temple in the hullabaloo of this exercise. I'm not sure what kind of injury what kinds of injuries were inflicted upon those in attendance. The Bible is silent about that, but I want to submit today to you and I that Jesus stood in that temple and said, I can't breathe in this place. My house shall be called the house of prayer. But you turned it into a place of merchandise. That means you have removed the honor. You have removed the dignity. You have removed the glory. You have removed the anointing. You have removed that which is holy and replaced it with that which is farcical, that which is temporal, that which is unjust, that which is unholy, because they use unholy scales in the house of God. And so I want to submit to you today, not in justification of violence, but I want to submit today that when we look at what is going on in Chicago, when we look at what's going on in Los Angeles, not far from the Olive Grove and Fairfax, when we look at what's happening in Atlanta, when we look at what's happening in New York, look at what's happening in Philadelphia, we must not for 1 minute attempt to be disingenuous to separate the violence served upon black people for at least the last 400 years, 500 years of slavery. We must not, 400 years of indignation that was served upon people that in 2020 still has become, in a sense, for some of these police officers, vermin woman, that means shoot anytime you see them. We must not now miscalculate that kind of anger, residual anger, for an unjust, ungodly system. When people rise up and set things alight, when people start to loot, yes, we can argue that the looters came by themselves, but I would like to argue that is a place you reach when nonviolence and passive resistance don't help you much. I want to submit today to you, if anybody comes into my house at 2 o'clock in the morning, as a preacher I am, as holy as I am, as a father as I am, I would submit to you, if somebody comes into my house as a robber, as a thief in the middle of the night, and we would meet each other in my passageway, I don't know if I would not be angry enough to snuff out life out of him, because there is a place, a fine line where you can go. When you've been subjected to robberies on several occasions, you somehow develop a mindset to say that this cannot go on. What we see happening in the streets of America right now is people saying it cannot go on as usual. Don't romanticize what happened in the 60s. Do not keep us now in a cage, because we all have to somehow keep up the legacy of MLK, and that's a beautiful legacy, by the way. But don't forget also the legacy of Malcolm X, who was also nonviolent within that particular setting. But the reality is that there is a militancy, there is a reality that we have to contend with, and the time that we are in demands perhaps a different response. Every nation must take stock now and then where they find themselves. It is time that the American society takes stock of where it finds itself. It has given, as King said years ago, it has given the Negroes a bad check. King said they gave Negroes a bad check. The check came back marked insufficient funds, marked insufficient funds in economic justice, marked insufficient funds in freedom, marked insufficient funds in equality, marked insufficient funds in access to land. That is the state of the reality. And if we 50, 60 years later after King still have to argue that Americans should still be upholding the philosophy or the thought or the epistemology of the idea of nonviolence, we are fooling ourselves, because there is a place where I Can't Breathe stands larger, looms larger than anywhere else. And we don't know what that place is, but it's possible that in the midst of this COVID-19 now, for the last 6 days, what's happening in America is outstripping the reality of a COVID-19, because injustice anywhere is still a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice, what that was served on Mr. Floyd, can never become justice. And so it becomes important to appreciate from that point of view the fact that we cannot, even though we don't want to condone violence, but we have to appreciate what is going on. And we must stop the romanticizing of leadership of people that served 50 years ago. We must deal with the reality of this hour. This hour needs leadership to rise and say no is no, enough is enough. I'm trying to say that Jesus stood within the temple and said enough is enough. Enough is enough. He put together a whip and whipped them out. He had the tables turned over, and I can almost in my imaginative eye see the craziness of that moment, but I can also sense the rage, the holy rage within him, that at least his house would have been kept holy, but his house became a den of thieves. You have made, he says to them, you have made my house a den of thieves. You have made it a place of imbalance and unholy scales. You've made it a place of trading in merchandise when it was supposed to be for all nations. That is the challenge that we are confronted with today. When I hear Jesus in John chapter 2 articulate these words to say that you have made my Father's house a den of thieves, I'm hearing him saying, I can't breathe in this space. I can't breathe in this place. I cannot breathe in a place of unholiness. And maybe it's time that we all declare we can no longer breathe in injustice. We can no longer be intoxicated by injustice. We can no longer allow injustice to reign and let iniquity triumph over that which is righteous. It is time that we realize that we must get up, we must stand up, we must fill the streets, and we must protest, and let nobody dictate what form and shape and identity our protest may take, because there's a place where you reach where violence in that sense is dealt with its response. And its response is perhaps what we have seen within the context of this last week. You're asking me, preacher, are you condoning violence? I said no. Are you condoning what has transpired? I say no. Are you understanding it? Yes, I understand it from the frame of the biblical narrative that Jesus, the historical Jesus, who so often is misunderstood in meekness of mind and meekness of acts, also reached a place when he was violent, and you can sugarcoat it as much as you like to. I even think that most of the commentators, given where they come from, sugarcoated this particular portion, but among others, concerning the historical Jesus. But the historical Jesus, for me, is the real Jesus I'm following. He's the Jesus that has shown little regard, if any at all, to the false worship of religious leaders that he declared hypocrites. The historical Jesus that I worship is the Jesus that had problems with people that were hypocritical in their approach. And I'm afraid that when Governor Walz stands up there and say to the people, of Minneapolis, Minnesota, when he says to them that you cannot do what you're doing, that perhaps he's doing what we've always known white power to have done. Number one is inflict the pain. Number two, prescribe the medicine for the pain. Number three, declaring how long you can be on the injury list. And number four, determining how you may mourn the pain. That is the challenge we are contending with. But I'm glad that I found from the biblical text that Jesus too said one time, I can't breathe in this atmosphere. My fellow brothers and sisters, those of you that may not perhaps like this kind of sermon, well, I felt led to preach it like I've preached every other sermon. And if you can't contend with this one, you can't enjoy the others too. The fact of the matter is that Jesus made a whoop and whipped them out, drove them out. Jesus showed us that there was a means, or rather there's a place where violence responds. There's a place where your convictions are so sincere, where your heart is so real, where you are so perturbed that you respond the way you responded at the temple, at the cleansing of the temple. And so today I want to say, America, for the black man, will always be a place of non-breathing. America, for the black man, will always be a place of not living, but trying to survive. Because the spaces that's supposed to protect, the institution that's supposed to protect what is considered to be a 200-year-old democracy, has failed the black man, has failed the black man not once, has failed the black man not twice, has failed the black man not for 5 years, but has consistently failed the black man. And so what do you expect the black man to do? What do you expect those who agree with the sentiment? And by the way, there are white people that agrees and says, no, enough is enough. What do you expect them to respond? Do you want them to be responding the same way that King responded at the lunch counters in the 60s? Do you want them to respond the same way that King had responded at the Selma March or the Montgomery bus boycott? When we know that Rosemary Marks told us years ago, my feet are tired. And if I can put it that way again, then the African-American nation is saying today with this, we are tired. tired, our feet are tired of having to carry the burden of proving who we are, of having to defend our identity against the systematic and institutionalized criminalized racism that finds itself active within the justice system. That is the reality, that the black boy can't get up this morning and he can't breathe walking down in Watts. He can't breathe finding himself in Compton. The black boy cannot breathe trying to get up in the corporate ladder. The black boy can't breathe when he's trying to make a career for himself. The black boy can't breathe if he's trying to start a business somewhere, because America as a society has remained caged up and carceral to the reality of what it means to have freedom within that sense. Since Derek Chauvin did what he did so because he can do so, because he had for 18 times done it, and nobody has done nothing about it. But I want you to know today that we have an obligation in solidarity to say we will breathe again. It must be that we will insist on oxygen in this season. We will insist. The oxygen of justice is not even though in low supply, must be made available to all of us. The oxygen of love that is now not real must be made real again. The oxygen of opportunities economically, in terms of land redress in every area, must now become a reality. It cannot be that we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King in this fashion by romanticizing a nonviolence attitude and demand of people to march beautifully and close their march beautifully and then go home and go and rest. It has to be an obligation on our part to ask, beyond this philosophy and ideology that Mahatma Gandhi infused upon Dr. King, what are we to do in the season that we find ourselves in? Well, I found what God has taught me to say, that I at least understand that Jesus himself, the historical Jesus, said at one time, standing in the middle of his temple, said, I can't breathe in this place. There's something about not being able to breathe in spaces where you're supposed to live. There's something about not being able to breathe in spheres and in realms where you're supposed to have control. There's something about not being able to breathe when you're supposed to inhale and exhale easily within the spaces that you have claimed to be yours, particularly if you have a democratic franchise called a system of the vote. And so when America today has to contend this reality, it pales into oblivion the reality of COVID-19, because injustice is still more important. Injustice is still pronouncing itself and more paramount in the American society than in any other society. And may I add, even in SA at this point in time, injustice is still real for the black man, because the black man still don't own his land. The black man and the African man still don't own what is his, because it was taken away. And we have a democratic system in this nation that continues to perpetuate the reality of white supremacy out of the toolbox of an apartheid system that have declared white supreme. We must ask ourselves, shall we continue, as in the case of the lunch counters, with passive resistance, or shall we rise to ask and take a leaf out of Jesus' book in John 2? I can't breathe in this place. The words that will memorialize Mr. George Floyd forever is, I can't breathe. But I want to say, if I would be allowed to say it, George Floyd, you moved on. Like Trayvon, you moved on. Like Castile, you moved on. Yet this morning, America is breathing. It's breathing when people demand justice. It's breathing when people demand justice, that not only one particular person in the name of Derek Chauvin be arrested on third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter, but that be scaled up to second-degree murder, and the reality of second-degree murder means intent. America breathed this morning because it seeks justice for the other three that must come in account, because they too have their knees on the back of Floyd as Chauvin pounced over him with his hands in his pocket. America is breathing for the first time this morning again in a long time, because people are saying, we won't let this happen again. America is breathing this morning because somebody is saying, I can't breathe. And they heard that call. Jesus said, I can't breathe in this temple, and decided to put together a whip and whipped out those that were the perpetrators of injustice. I'm signing off this morning, not in instigation of any violence, but in recognition that my justification is found within the historical Jesus. That my understanding of what's going on in the streets of the U.S., no different to what we were subjected to in the 80s and many other times in this very nation of ours called South Africa. I understand this because I look through it. I look at it through the eyes and the lens of the historical Jesus. I can look through no other lens but Jesus. Thank you. God bless you.
So just after I was finishing up this video, Clyde sent me a message saying that his dear friend and comrade, Bradley Stain, had suffered some injuries tonight in the LA protest. He was a peaceful protester there and was shot with a rubber bullet, actually meant multiple rubber bullets, one of which really did a lot of damage to his groin area. It ruptured his left testicle. They had to remove 40% of it. So he is in the operating room here in this picture. He actually is one of the MK, which those of you who know South African history, the freedom fighters, veteran. He's an MK veteran. Worked for years in the underground there and for the cause of justice alongside Clyde and others. And he actually fell in love with an American woman and moved to California. So he's now in the LA area, and he was joining the protests tonight, but just kind of another connecting point from America to South Africa with this friend of Clyde's and the people out in the streets who are peacefully demonstrating and are being met with brutality in these moments. So just wanted to share his story, wishing him well, wishing him peace, wishing him a safe operation, and all of those who are out there and injured or arrested or in other states of peril or harm's way. Just sending some positive thoughts, loving vibes, all of the best of life and health and safety to them. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed Clyde's sermon today, and leave your comments, your thoughts in the comment section below the post, and we will do another video in the future. We'll see how this all goes, in the coming days, and once again, be inspired to take action in some form, whether it's phone calls, writing, marching, getting water or food to protesters, writing, like sending cards, sending gifts, sharing resources, letting people crash on your couch, whatever it is, helping rebuild small businesses, just, whatever it is that you feel like is the call to action that you have in your heart. Do something, I think there's something for all of us to do. So take heart, stay encouraged, stay strong, and know that, this is about all of us in the country right now, and there's something for everyone to do and for anyone to do, and everyone's voice matters, and you're not just like a worthless part of the picture because you don't have a history of activism or you don't have a long resume of strategies or whatever. Just do what's in your heart to do. So take care, sending love. By the way, the previous images were a sampling of some of my art pieces that I really feel like speak to these current times.